On June of 2005, over 3,000 women's studies scholars, women's rights activists, and policymakers from 75 nations convened at Ewha Women's University in Korea for the Women's World's 2005 9th International Interdisciplinary Congress on Women. Since 1981, the Women's World Congress has convened every 3 years and has grown to become a truly global event covering a variety of academic fields in women's studies. This was the largest congress ever and the first to be held in Asia, where many have eagerly awaited for this conference to take place.
제9차 세계 여성학대회는 동북아시아에 위치한 한국이라고 하는 또 하나의 문명의 현장에서 전 지구 여성의 아시아적인 연대를 확인하시고 그리고 동과 서, 남과 북이 하나 되는 여성주의의 가능성을 확인하는 새로운 경험이 되시기를 바랍니다.
We have a unique opportunity to cross the boundaries between East and West, North and South, between disciplines, social and political identities. We must now step out to claim our right to govern and find solutions.
The slogan for the 9th Congress is Embracing the Earth, East-West, North-South. We hope to bring about a rich discussion concerning the economic disparity between North and South and contesting values between East and West. We looked at how these factors affect women's lives around the world and how we can foster a new generation of equality and give it direction.
동쪽에서 서쪽에서 그리고 남쪽과 북쪽에서 우리는 이곳에 모였습니다. 우리의 마음이 하나로 모인 이곳은 우리의 집입니다. 지구를 감싸는 힘, 세계를 창조하는 꿈은 여기 이곳에서 다시 시작됩니다.
We began the Congress with a keynote speech by Honorary Dr. Gertrude Mongella and her vision of feminism. Honorary Dr. Mongella is the first woman to be president of the Pan-African Parliament.
It's only when you are on the steering wheel that you can manage the speed of a boat, of a plane, or of a car. Or when you are walking yourself, when you can feel the ground. Women must lead if we want to change the world. If we do not lead, we'll always be beggars on the corridors of power.
And I think we've sort of got a litany in the women's movement now of all the major challenges and obstacles, what I sometimes call the big three, inequitable globalization, fundamentalisms, and militarism. And these have all made it more difficult. They have combined in a way to increase the culture of violence rather than the culture of peace today. Particularly, I know globalization is the topic tomorrow, but I think one of the pieces of inequitable globalization that we don't discuss enough is the way it has created gaps between women. The inequitable way in which it has been a possibility for advancing of some women, but not for many women. And that, I think, has actually made it harder sometimes for us to build the solidarity we need, because women are, in fact, further apart from each other in their situation globally in terms of economic resources than we were 50 years ago.
And that is how even movements that call themselves peace movements, or movements or organizations that call themselves anti-war organizations, can in fact replicate and deepen patriarchal forms of militarized masculinity. I know that's a mouthful. Patriarchal forms of militarized masculinity in their very efforts in the name of peace and militarism. So it takes a lot of feminist creativity and feminist thinking to actually have a demilitarized form of anti-militarist activism.
The workers are going into the factory They're participating in that circular flow. But what you see is not abstract red arrows, but the work of many women who are replenishing and restoring the labor power of those workers in a kind of assembly line, a hidden assembly line of their own within the home. What I think feminist economists are trying to do is look in more detail at this process, look in more detail at this process of social reproduction and try and give it some empirical dimension.
So many strategies to eradicate poverty in poorer countries focus on labor-intensive strategies. Let's get people into the labor market. But we know that women in majority of the world have time burdens. So the more labor work in the official economy that you give to women, you are not doing anything to decrease their time burden. We've just seen in Korea that women are working, if they're working outside of the home, they are working 116% of that of men. So what does this mean in terms of our poverty eradication strategies? That we need to go back to the very root strategies of alleviating women's time burdens.
I saw women who had gone through group rape for 3 months. There were no sparks in their eyes. And yet, these sisters came together. They worked together. They raised children together. Because before that, they had no right to land and they couldn't be head of household in their country. And yet, they worked together. So I saw strength in these women. And that makes me want to be a global citizen. So I think it's so important for us to work together.
Most women and girls are victims because of the unequal power relationships that exist between women and men. And there are many women who will know that their partners are infected. They will even know they are moving around with the people who are infected, but they have no power to say no to them. And so part of what we have to correct in order to stop the pandemic is really to get men to become responsible partners to women and to say no to practices that are endangering not only themselves as men, but also the women as their partners.
What the cases of health policy advances in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and China suggest are two things. One, that social policy changes have in fact created some important openings and opportunities for women, but these changes are far from uniform. A move forward may be countered by more moves backwards at the same time. Secondly, we also need to pay closer attention to how health policy creates new lines of inequality.
Just a few warnings, because we talk about women and environment as if it's one group, but that's not right, and if it goes together. Environmental conservation and gender equality do not always coincide. It's not always a win-win situation. So a clear gender analysis is always necessary in environmental policies. Generalizations make us blind for particularities. Therefore, it's so important to contextualize to particular local situations. And last but not least, not all women are the same. There are so many differences amongst us. So we have to look to these differences and to look at the different groups.
And finally, my final point here, rethinking gender and modernity, is that men were never modern. They never achieved it. They never transcended their local bourgeois, Western, or Hindu, or what Islamic, or whatever their particular local cultural identities were. They never became universal humans, right? Universal humans. They always retained elements of their cultures. They were never autonomous individuals loosely wandering around the world. They have always been dependent on the labor and emotional work and social ties of others, and particularly especially of women. And they have a very limited form of rationality because they can't see the kinds of things I've just been mentioning. They can't identify and they don't detect their own situation in the world.
During the conference, we had an abundance of cultural events for women around the world to share ideas on women's issues. These events included media art exhibitions, film festivals, art festivals, and memorial events.
I think I really was very impressed by the exhibit on comfort women, and I think the exhibit was very emotive for me. I found it very interesting that women are very courageously, young women are taking on a number of very difficult topics about the body, topics about sexuality, topics about the mother. I think there's a kind of strength and a courage and a liveliness to this artwork in a great diversity of what I've seen.
On the second day of the conference, we had a stunning performance in honor of the victims of domestic violence. This included a memorial performance and poetry reading to comfort the spirits of the countless women who died from their husbands' violence. All who attended the performance, including many policymakers, created an impromptu handwritten message reading, "We must banish domestic violence," in each of their respective languages. In our special event, we joined Comfort Women, the victims of the Japanese military, who for 13 years ceaselessly demonstrated in front of the Japanese embassy every Wednesday.
You know, when I came 5 years ago, the crowd was about half. So now it's heartening to me to see that there are more people coming, there's more awareness, more attention focused on these harmonies. And I can only say that I admire them even more, you know, as the years go by, in their courage for speaking out, but also their determination to continue to speak out until they're finally heard. So I am so touched to be here again for the second time. And I was telling somebody else that when I first saw Kyung Jo Hwang speak, she seemed smaller. And now, you know, she looks exactly the same, but she seems bigger, you know? Like the more she tells the story, the more powerful she becomes.
And I'm also what I like the most about the conference is the mixture between academia and activism, and that you also have art and film. So I've tried to catch up, or I went to the art exhibition and I've seen some films, and also went to the demonstration yesterday at the Japanese embassy, and I went to see the exhibition today with about the sexual slavery of Korean women. So I think that has been the most interesting. I think that's my main, what I'm left with is this type of mixture, which I really enjoy, because normally you have these academic conferences where you only have the academic part and you don't put anything into action. So I think that's my lasting impression from the conference.
There was a record 2,200 paper submissions for this conference, a remarkable success. We also had a variety of sessions in the afternoons, including panel sessions, roundtables, workshops, poster sessions, film sessions, totaling nearly 500 sessions. We held lively presentations and discussions on 20 sub-themes such as globalization, NGOs and activism, women's studies, environment, peace, welfare, and global agenda in Asia.
As I'm from Sweden, and also because I work on prostitution and trafficking there, and that we have legislation that is going towards the goal to eliminate prostitution, it's wonderful to see the stance that women have taken in Korea.
I think one of the major things that Korean feminists are teaching us is, in fact, how militarization works and how much it depends on women and women's compliance, and therefore how women, if they begin to not be complicit in militarism, can actually roll militarism back. I think the work being done by Korean feminists is very important in this global effort. The other thing that's very closely related is that Korean feminists have taught, especially Americans, about what American bases are like. You know, most Americans have no idea what a U.S. overseas base is like. It's never talked about in the press. Most Americans don't have a clue about prostitution around U.S. bases. They don't know anything.
동양의 권위주의, 그다음에 왜곡되어진 서구의 영향력, 이런 것들의 그 이미지를 한국이 갖고 있기 때문에 문화적인 교류라고 얘기하는 것들이 현대사에서 어떻게 다른 문화를 만들어낼 수 있을까라는 질문이 우리 사회만큼 적절하게 제기될 수 있는 게 어디 있겠는가, 이런 좀 생각이 들었습니다. 그래서 이러한 것들이 저희가 섹션, 각 분과 영역을 만드는데 다 영향을 줬습니다. 그래서 저희는 그러한 남과 북, 동과 서의 문제를 한국 여성들이 어떻게 겪고 극복해 갔는가, 그리고 우리의 과제는 무엇인가 하는 것들을 세계 학계에 드러내고자 노력을 했다고 저는 생각을 합니다.
Ewha Women's University has symbolized the spirit and tradition of women's education in Korea. In 1977, the first women's studies curriculum was incorporated into the university, similar in time with the West. Ewha was the first to establish a department for a graduate course on women's studies in 1982, followed by a doctoral program in 1990. Currently, Korea boasts 10 graduate colleges in this field. Although Korean women's studies has had a relatively short history of 20 years, it has developed rapidly and has assumed a leading role in women's studies in Asia.
Actually, even among the East Asian countries, well, including Japan, Singapore, and Taiwan, and China, and others, well, the institutionalization of women's studies and also legal implementation of gender issues have been much advanced here in your country, but in particular with a very strong political leadership, in which, leading women in Korea are participating in, and which is not taking place back in Japan. So actually, in this sense, you know that the Koreans women's studies and the Koreans institutionalization of gender issues has served as a kind of model. But with this political leadership, you know, you can make it.
This 9th Congress has been an excellent opportunity to show the world how Asia has grown in the field of women's studies and for Asian women to take on the initiative in opening new grounds for discussion. Also, Asian scholars who have dedicated themselves to better women's studies education shared papers that incorporated theories and situations unique to the Asian context. This gives us fresh comparative understandings of Eastern and Western perspectives.
In some way, we are always quoting or citing all Western feminist scholars in our papers and our books. But actually, those scholars whom I quoted never cited my work in their work. They have never read my piece, but I always read their thesis and their essays and their books and articles. This is kind of never reciprocal, never intellectual. Even when we met in Ewha, 8 Asian country scholars, if we look at our bibliography, so common. But actually, the differences are so common, but actually we don't know each other's work actually. We realized that that's a big problem. So we had, at the time, we decided to build a new intellectual or citational or referential community. That is a kind of new space and new community for intellectual or knowledge production in some sense. So in that sense, the fourth category, inter-Asian women's studies space, maybe I can mention.
I mean, I'm very happy to see that the AJWS has been a forum for that development, because we've had a lot of pieces from China, and I don't really think, non-native English speakers, whatever that might mean, have such a hard task. It's something which I do highlight in my paper, that it's really not the language issue which is so difficult to get past. It's much more the conceptual issues which are more difficult to get through.
This perspective will help us understand the history of Asian women within a global framework, not just from a Western perspective.
I think we Asian women learned a lot from the 4th International Women's Conference. That impact has been great to us in Asia, because it's so close for Asian women to go to Beijing. And now I think it's important, because with the growth of economy, I think the growth of feminist movement go together with it. So now we can also share, sisters from the West, what we've been doing, because feminism started in the West, right? We have been influenced by that, and now I think it's a kind of exchange, because I think these meetings are bridges. Bridges bring people together, connect people. So it's a kind of a networking. So they know what we're doing.
The amazing development of women's studies in Asia was showcased through various events throughout the Congress. The Asian Women's Studies textbook that was developed collaboratively by scholars in 8 countries over the past 5 years was launched during this Congress.
Strongly affirms that alliance building among sisters in Asia is the way forward to develop further the theories and practices on women's studies in the region, and with confidence and pride showcases the experiences in Asia to a global audience. To you, congratulations and carry on.
아시아 각국에서 읽힐 뿐만 아니라 외국에서도 읽히고, 그러니까 그런 이제 우리의 경험을 밝히면서 이걸 세계적으로 어떤 네트워크를 만들면서 거대한 변화의 물결을 이끌어나는 그런 기본 베이스가 되는 그런 데서 굉장히 의미가 있다고 생각을 합니다.
This project also brought together feminists from the West who built the framework of feminist theories in the 60s and 70s with a new generation of feminists from the East. We recognize that women's studies has grown rich through the work of Asian scholars and activists.
언제나 아시아라고 하면 굉장히 고통받거나 억압받거나 그러니까 그러한 여성들의 삶은 존재하지만 그것을 또 어떤 방식으로 재현하느냐는 문제는 다른 문제인 것이고, 특히 젊은 여성들, 그리고 교육의 혜택을 받은 여성들, 그리고 또 전 세대 페미니즘의 어떤 수혜를 받은 여성들은 굉장히 이제 여성들의 삶을 다른 방식으로 바꿔내고 있는 거죠. 그러니까 그러한 자기 경험들, 자기 이야기들을 재현을 하고 싶은 것들, 그래서 세계 여성학 대회라고 하는 자리에서 그 변해가는 젊은 아시아 여성들의 모습을 보여주고, 그리고 그들이 어떠한 지식들과 어떠한 언어들을 만들어 가는가, 그러한 것들을 보여주고 싶은 것들이 굉장히 이 세션을 이제 우리가 기획하고 끌고 온 가장 어떤 중요한 동기가 되었다고 생각하고.
I must say one of the most impressive things to me is the organizing of the young feminist in Asia. I think I heard the E list has like 30 or 40,000 participants, and the sessions that I went to had like 8 participants, each from a different country. That's a huge organizing capacity. Like, that's really exciting, so I think that's significant. And I think it's good for feminists from different parts of the world to see that. You know, it's good for us all to see the kinds of things we can do and the successes we've had, and to get ideas for what else we could do.
This Congress has succeeded in bringing breadth and depth on widely understood women's issues, as well as exploring controversial issues.
To become industrialized and globalized.
My question is, in the convention, UN Convention, Anti-Trafficking Convention, it includes, I think it is pretty much comprehensive, and it includes other forms of coercion, but for the language it is using, I don't think that it includes any kind of militarism. Which I mean by that is, it doesn't touch the real root or real problem of the trafficking. So I'm wondering, is there any effort or plan to incorporate that kind of language into it?
In most cases, the UN and the militaries that are in your country are immune from the law. So that's a huge big issue that has to be looked at, is the immunity of the military and the immunity of the UN when they are the ones in fact who are doing this. And the second thing to realize is the law is not the solution. The law is a tool. It is a tool like any other tool. But it has to be in combination with a social movement, with education, with employment, with education, with increasing the income of women, with gender strategies that deal with the equality of women. The law is just a tool. So to look at the law as the answer is not going to work. So that certainly is a problem, yes. I'm not sure the law is the answer to it.
The Swedish legislation that prohibits the purchase of sexual services has a really good thing. It applies to our peacekeeping troops. So when they are stationed, and they get education, all of the peacekeeping forces before they leave Sweden are getting specific education on this legislation that is completely zero tolerance. If they breach the law, they will not only be sent home, they will be kicked off the peacekeeping troop, but they will also be taken to court under the legislation.
Many feminists talk jokes about that. Don't buy sex and do it with your hands, but I'm just wondering that people with disabilities who can do with their hands, I mean, I'm just worried about that joke. I mean, there are many people, like, I'm not agree about that prostitute must be legal or something, but there must be some consideration about these people with disabilities.
In fact, the sex industry has used the issue of the so-called sexual rights of disabled men, and it is men they're talking about, in order to argue there should be legalized prostitution, and there are brothels in Melbourne that specialize in this and put in special ramps. Women who are the paid carers of men have to go to the brothels with the men and put the penis of the man into the body of the prostituted woman. So you actually have two abused women at the same time. Of course, it is not the case that men have sexual rights to abuse the right of another person, whether they're disabled or not. There is absolutely no right of men to sexually abuse women, whatever situation they are in. So if you're suggesting there should be some mechanical implement which has nothing to do with the human being and does not require the sexual harassment of a woman to help that man to do whatever it is, that's a possibility. But we cannot possibly allow the sex industry to get away with using the issue of the so-called sexual rights of the disabled in order to legalize and normalize this industry.
In 1995, UN World Conference on Women, held in Beijing, established a global agenda that has led to a new discussions on a changing paradigm for mainstreaming the women's movements.
That's very clear at this conference.
Now, you have been mentioning education as a powerful tool to mainstreaming women. Education per se should also start from the administrative level. I have this feeling, even in the Philippines, that when women have become educated and empowered, they think and perpetuate ideologies of male. They become male leaders. They embody male characteristics themselves. They could be males in female bodies. And definitely even decisions have to be when brought down to the lowest level, would really be heartbreaking.
And you're describing phase 2, in which, having been educated a little, the group that was never allowed at the top, so-called top, now decides they're going to go for being at the top on its terms. So that, for me, it's a phase of development. It's very dangerous, produces substitute men. And they're not friends to anybody, really, except their own advancement. It's more common in my culture than in yours, perhaps. And phase 5 is a better balance, I think, between those vertical elements of climbing and competing, which I think are innate in us all, and between the other innate elements in us, which are to live laterally in symbiotic relationships. And I believe in both. And I love to see it when the phase 2 types who are out for personal advancement get hurt enough to begin to become critics of that system.
This Congress has succeeded in bringing together scholars, international organizations, and women activists. NGOs from many nations shared knowledge on the women's movements around the world through discussion and participation in NGO fairs.
This was a scarf that we used at the last Women's World Conference, and I had to wear it also here as a continuity. But here we love the T-shirts, and I bought the pins. So these are things we keep as mementos, and they keep reminding us that the struggle for women's empowerment and gender equality is not yet over. And each time you go on a different continent, you find there are different issues that women are confronting. And so this reminds us that the work is not yet done.
This Congress showed the world how much Korea has developed in 10 years regarding policies affecting women and the women's movement. More importantly, it formed the basis for a truly global network of women activists and global women's movements.
And what's really good about that is that in Australia, where prostitution is legalized, we need examples of countries like Korea, where the women's movement has taken a strong stand and got good legislation. Not perfect, but still pretty good legislation, which is very different from what we have in Australia. So for me, it's very inspiring, to talk to Korean women and be able to take that example back with me, and everywhere I go in the world to speak, to be able to say what Korean women are doing. So that was terrific.
We are at a stage of talking about issues like transnational feminism. How can we cooperate at a regional level? How can we cooperate at an international level? And the local needs to transcend, so we are working through so many layers. So if you want to work through so many layers, it's very important to network.
가부장제 사회를 특징 지어온 전쟁, 갈등, 지배와 복종의 패러다임을 넘어서서 공존, 차이를 인정하고 존중하면서도 상대방과 공존할 수 있는 그러한 새로운 패러다임을 모색하는 것이 저희에게 필요한 과제라고 생각합니다. 그래서 Embracing the Earth라고 하는 것은 경합하는 가치들, 그리고 경쟁, 억압, 이런 그 언어들을 한 단계 더 뛰어넘어서 어떤 식으로 포용하면서 다양한 가치를 가지고 뭔가 공통된 목표를 향해서 갈 수 있을까 하는 그런 모색의 반영이었다고 생각합니다.
Overcoming borders of East and West, North and South, we gathered from around the world to be here for the 9th International Interdisciplinary Congress on Women. Through 5 days of rich discussions and exchanges, we sought a new meaning of women's identity in the midst of development and globalization. We uncovered their cultural challenges as Eastern and Western cultures come together. We looked at social movements and policy making related to women's issues. And finally, we looked into effective methods of collaboration within Asia and beyond among members. Women from all over the world came to be as one, overcoming differences by regions, nationalities, and race, and to affirm our potentials and find new possibilities. Women's Worlds 2005 will be remembered as a historic event that defined our role and our alliance in overcoming conflicts and divisions in order to achieve equality and peaceful prosperity.